let's talk a little bit about the underlying theme that I noticed throughout the book. You talk about how the shift of the food quality has changed. And in one of your chapters, you say post-war Americans, after 15 years of the Great Depression and war, demanded everything from new homes and cars to convenient and inexpensive foods. As tastes change and food disappear, we lost so much of the cultural identity of places and the histories behind people who made them. That, to me, that was a very important point.
And it's not, and it covers everything. There, in my opinion, the last 50, 60 years of change in American agriculture, Americans have continued to demand inexpensive food. Post-war, those companies that were involved in, let's say, making munitions that were shifted gears. They weren't making munitions anymore, but they had access to chemicals. And instead of making gunpowder or explosives, they made inorganic fertilizer, which could boost, working with hybrid types of corn or soybeans or whatever it is, could boost yields and produce a lot of corn or soybeans at much less expense. And that was part of what fed us, for better or worse. There are very, very few people who haven't eaten Velveeta cheese. I did. My brother used to tease me when the book came out. He said, "What about those Velveeta sandwiches that you used to make?" You go into supermarkets even today and you look at the labels. A lot of it is industrial. My attitudes, fortunately, have been built over a number of decades. Long before I learned things that I know today, I wanted to know about who's making these foods. And I relate that a couple of times when I talk about Philadelphia and living there for a number of years. And the Reading Terminal Market, what was a market that had been around since the 1890s on the skids, and yet the people who came in were real producers. I think since the 90s, it actually goes back to the 70s, especially with fermentation, with wine and craft beer, both of which really take off in the 1980s, and then you add in artisan cheese and great bread. In the 90s, you see the emergence of a whole new culture around bacon. And, I'm not a fan of bacon in beer and bacon in chocolate, but those people who like it, right on. We're looking for something a little different.
Yes.
Social media, the internet has had a huge impact on you and me being able to access foods that we want to eat, whether it's chocolate bacon or something else.
Yes.
And I think that this has helped to enable small producers in the middle of nowhere to reach markets. That's a counterweight. We have a very, very long way to go to ensure that the quality, the safety of the foods that we eat is where we'd like, number one. And second, as we work it backwards, the impact on the environment, the impact on our planet is a beneficial one rather than a destructive one. And that's an enormous challenge to everyone. How do we feed the billions of people we have right now, let alone what it's going to look like in 2050?
Right. Okay, so the famous food writer Ruth Reichel said, "It was through cooking food and sharing it with each other that our ancestors learned how to become social animals." And in your book, I noticed there was a very strong connection between people and food. And you even talked about how we rub shoulders with people, strangers, in elevators and different places, public settings where we're, maybe hundreds of people and we don't talk to anybody. But when you gather around food, the door is open for dialogue. I love that.
It's hopefully. Um, I have challenges with cell phones because I find them sometimes very disruptive in a place where I want to be able to
Yes.
interact with the people who are sitting next to me, or people who I don't know. And my wife gets very upset with me because I don't carry my cell phone.
Hmm.
And when I do, it's generally off. Um, I'm interested in the world that's right there. Um, and food is still, from my perspective, it's not an equalizer. It's a connector.
Mm-hmm.
And probably the best example I have was in 2001 when I was one of the co-chairs of the U.S. presence at the Slow Food Cheese Festival,
Mm-hmm.
which happened 10 days after September 11th. When we made the decision to go, it was because this was one way to honor people who had died, families who had lost so much. And we were interviewed. Why are you here? And I constantly say, food is a way that can bring us together. We share stories. Oh, this is from my grandmother. This is important because uh, that's a food of the poor. Teaches us something about how people survive, and yet they're delicious. You know, I come away with such respect for those individuals, those women especially, who had to figure out with very little. My grandmother was one of them, with very little, how to feed people, how to make it tasty, how to make it nutritious, and they were successful.
I did it.
You know, and this is the other piece of this that kind of comes back to your earlier question about immigrants. The majority of people who come to the United States, beginning in the 16th century, they don't have anything.
Mm-hmm.
They're leaving for whatever reason, religious persecution. There's no way that they're going to survive where they are, and so forth. Political upheaval. They come, and they have to adapt to a new place. And our country enables so many people to be successful. That doesn't mean that they didn't struggle, and often struggled hard. Didn't mean that they weren't discriminated against. They certainly were. But those foods teach us about our history. And to me, that's part of the importance of why I wrote this book.
So true. And I love that part about your book too. I want to go back to your interviews. I noticed that you interviewed 57 people. That must have taken a year or more.
The book took 14 months. I didn't interview as many people as I had originally thought I might. Uh-huh. As generous as my publisher was, I ran out of resources to get to some of the places that I wanted to get to.
Okay.
The internet today, when I wrote the Atlas, I talked to probably, of the 345 profiles, at least 250, maybe more of those cheesemakers.
Wow.
That must I had to.
A long time too.
Well, it was, but it was fortunately fairly, that was a little more focused interview. Some of the interviews that I conducted went on for 2 or 3 days, on and off. And there are still people that I interviewed that I haven't had an opportunity to actually go and visit. I really relate this where I had the chance to go and visit and actually be on the ground. The other piece is that there's so much, whether we're talking cured meat or cheese or bread or what have you, so much going on in our country to celebrate. It cost me $1 more for the loaf of bread. It's worth it for me.